Hello and welcome to our AzureDIY Season 2, Episode 7. So I'm not going to say what exactly the name of this session is, but it's all about identities. And I totally blame our speaker, Tristan, who is directly from the product team, who has come up with a complicated name like this. And he believes that the topic is so complicated, we should come up with a name that is complicated enough to symbolize the topic. But he's here today to make it all simple for you guys. But before I actually hand it over to Tristan, who is an amazing person on identity to integration to obviously Azure, anything related to PaaS, DevOps, and all this stuff. And he's also coming from the product team as well. So he's a part of the Azure AD B2C product team. So you can shoot all your questions that whatever comes to your mind. If you're doing some exciting projects, you can tell him that today. But we'll start with an exciting part of the quiz. So we'll go through all the questions, what we do normally. So I'll go through the one. Yep. So before we jump onto the quiz, so we have already exhausted all of our 7 sessions by today. We have got one more before the year end, and then it's all about the Christmas and the Happy New Year, and then we'll come back with the Season 3. Also, please join in our LinkedIn community. So we'll be keeping you guys posted. And also today we'll share the survey so you can select which topics would you like to hear from us in the Season 3. And we will have, again, amazing speakers lined up to talk to you guys directly and answer all your questions. So here comes the exciting parts. Let's go through the questions. Who can answer first? OK, so how many software as a service apps does Azure Active Directory support for single sign-on? I have a hint for you guys, bigger the better. I don't see any answers coming through. I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A section and giving it some more time. Just I'm conscious of time, so so I think I'll carry on and give the answer. It's 2,800, and it's quite a lot. So as I'd say, it is bigger the better. The next one, let's go to the next question. Yep. So Azure Active Directory Connect is a service used to sync data between on-premise environment and Azure AD. True or false? Any answers? Do we have any answers? I don't see any. Cool, so yep, we'll go through the answer. So here you go. Yeah, it's true. The next question, and the final question for today. Azure Active Directory does not offer free option. Come on, we all know the answer. Azure gives everything for free. Not everything, but there's so many things for free. Yep. I've got the answer. Yes, it is true. And now finally, before we jump on to Tristan, I will be just a quick thing. This session is obviously recorded, and the recorded session will be available on our LinkedIn page. So if you are missing it and if you want to share this recording, please go to our LinkedIn page and watch it there. And also there are loads of recording that has been shared from our Season 1 and Season 2, which are available there as well. So please feel free to jump in there. Now I hand it over to our very own famous Tristan.
Thank you, Shri, for the stunning introduction. I'll just share my screen. Just tell me if that works.
Just give me a few seconds. Yep, I got it.
All good?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, etc., wherever you are. Again, thanks to Shri for the stunning intro, and thanks to viewers for coming to this session, which is on B2C, B2B, to C to external, etc. When to use what. So it can be quite a confusing topic. So hopefully today we will demystify this and enable you to build your identity strategy moving forwards. So what we are going to cover today, I'm going to quickly cover what's changed recently with external identities, specifically the announcement with Build around licensing, etc. And then sort of why we're talking different identity scenarios with quizzes. Some tools that we can use to reduce the complexity. It's like when you use to sim resource, if you will. And it generally comes down to questions to ask, and this is how we can fix everything. It's actually really cool. We'll have a brief architecture review in how we can use AD multi-tenancy with B2C. We'll go into what is AD multi-tenancy, and then we'll demo identity protection and risk-based conditional access with B2C, and then we'll cover some next steps. So firstly, what has changed to what products and services? So the old way of doing things was that there was AAD, and a sub-feature of AAD is called B2B. And then there was a separate service, if you will, called B2C. So B2B previously was licensed with AAD P2. So you, as the enterprise, had to go out and purchase a bunch of AAD P2 licenses, which entitled you to a 4:1 or 5:1 ratio, whatever it was. And B2C was its own thing, licensed separately, separate service, separate tenant, separate everything. So this day and age, or what's recently changed, is what's now called external identities, and it is comprised of two key components. The CIAM perspective, or customer identity access and management perspective, which is the B2C scenario, and the collaboration scenario, which is B2B, if you will. From a licensing perspective, so the old P2 way, that's gone entirely. So you now no longer have to go and spend lots of money purchasing or gobbling up P2 licenses. One license covers both scenarios. So there's a P1, P2 license, and it's just a feature difference. And that covers, again, both the collaboration and CIAM scenarios. You get 50,000 for free, and it's 50,000 what's called a unique monthly active user, or MAU, and they're unique. So if you have one user that logs in 50,000 times for the month, you'll only be charged or billed, or that counts once. So you need 50,000 unique users, which you get for free. So you start paying 50,001, 2 and so on and so forth, and it's pretty cheap. It's 0.022465 cents, or whatever it is. So it's extremely cheap. We're obviously one of the only providers that can provide that flexible billing model. So you go get a quote from a different provider, I won't name any names, and it'll be minimum $1 million. With us, it's free due to the economy of scale of Azure AD and Microsoft. We own our own data centers. If we run out of capacity, we go build more. No other providers do that. So from a super quick level, external identities equals, or is, what you understood as B2B with the concept of user flows and social providers. And B2C is still the same, and we've just added some features. So the B2C licensing change, when this occurred, I was having this conversation 10 times a day. It's how to migrate to new licensing, to new P1, P2 licensing. I'll admit our docs are quite confusing around how to do this, so I'll just explain what it is, and I'll go in and quickly show you how to do it. You have an enterprise AD tenant. This is your enterprise tenant that you log into. I will talk a lot about your enterprise AD tenant today. Pretty straightforward, username, password, bang, you're in. In Azure, more or less, a tenant has one or more subscriptions tied to that tenant. A subscription is a billing boundary for services. Again, more or less. A subscription has one or more resource groups. A resource group is a logical container for services that generally have the same life cycle in Azure. When you provision a new B2C tenant, it is a new separate tenant. For those of you who have used B2C at all, you'll know that to interface and administer B2C, you go to the top right-hand side of the portal, click your name, click switch directory, your tenants get listed, click your B2C tenant, your portal then gets turned entirely into that B2C tenancy, if you will. The context gets switched. Our docs say that to modify the licensing, you go into B2C and you click on the change licensing button, if you will, but it's not there. So if you go and look in B2C, it doesn't exist, and I'll show you that. What happens is when you provision a B2C tenant, you have to tie it to a subscription. What that then does is this creates a B2C resource within a resource group within that subscription it's tied to. And this resource is where you change licensing. So not your B2C tenant, it's the B2C resource itself. So I will very quickly show you what that looks like. So this is my B2C tenant. I'll use this throughout this this preso, which is fine, and that's cool. And what I would do is I would go into this B2C tenant. As our docs say, I'll go into the overview blade, and in here somewhere there should be the change licensing button. As you can see, it's not here. It doesn't exist. I would expect it to exist here, but it doesn't. So a lot of people get stuck here and then ask questions, well, how do I change licensing, et cetera, et cetera. So remember, you don't go to the B2C tenant where I am. You go into your enterprise tenant where you tied the subscription, and there will be a B2C resource. So what that looks like for me is I have my enterprise tenant over here. It's the Microsoft tenant. I'm going to go into resource groups, go into my resource group where my B2C resource is. And we can see here, I've got an Azure AD B2C resource. This is the Gen 7 Tech, which is the tenancy I was just in before. Now we can see in this main overview window, there's pricing tier over here. I'm currently running Premium P2. I can left click on change and I can change whatever I want. So again, the point being is don't go into the B2C tenant itself to change licensing. Go into the B2C resource. So anyone who's ever engaged with Microsoft, what would have happened is you probably got 50 Microsoft people paraded in front of you, and this slide would have come up in one way or another. And there's stories around the slide, blah, blah, blah. So my story around this slide is that whatever you're doing, whether it's a greenfields project, you've built an e-commerce platform, you've built an internal system to count something, count receipts or whatever it is. It's a system for your customers to log into. It's a system, for your HR staff to do stuff, whatever it is. Regardless of what it is, regardless of where it is, it's on premise, it's in Azure. It's a system that you've lifted and shifted and you've begun to modernize. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The employees are logging into it, whether it's customers or partners. There's two questions that always get asked first. One, how do people log into it? And two, how do we secure it? There's no point making something if people can't log into it. So that's sort of a question that has to be, answered first, right? And obviously they have to do that in a secure manner, and those services have to be secure. So what I'm trying to get is that regardless of what you're doing, the identity decision underpins the success of that project and in a way defines the architecture. And what we're beginning to look at, we've looked at for a while, is that we describe identity as a security perimeter instead of the legacy way of the network security. So IP restrictions and whatever else, blah, 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 still important. But we sort of consider identity as a primary security perimeter for whatever you're doing. And then we can talk about concepts such as zero trust, etc. Won't talk about it here. Point being, this underpins everything. So it's important to figure it out. So when you're doing that and what you want and what your customers want, when your customers log into these platforms that you make, what they want is they want to use an existing account. Nothing irks me more than when I go buy something somewhere and I have to create a username and password, another username and password. That problem has been solved for a long time. And that's what people want. It's a very seamless user experience. For you, the enterprise, when you're building this system and you want your customers to log into it, you don't want to be managing these accounts. You don't want to be in the business of storing, maintaining and administering usernames and passwords. If you have a database with a table that has a username, a password and a salt in there, you're doing it wrong. Do something else. Don't be in that business, because what will happen is you will end up in the news. Organizations, probably shouldn't name them, Yahoo, Sony, Adobe, etc. go to haveibeenpawned.com, look at these places that have leaked millions and hundreds of millions of accounts, right? You don't want to be like that. And with Azure AD, we stop that. We protect your brand and we keep you out the news. Now, those sunshines and rainbows, that's fantastic. But when you actually start getting in the nitty gritty, there's some immediate questions and topics that come up. And this is where the complexity comes into it. And this is where people stop. Security overall and identity, of which falls under security from a Microsoft perspective, they're complex topics. Complex from a high level, medium level, and low level. Specifically for identity, it's just identifying which identity scenarios you need. If you've got your customers logging into it, then also your enterprise users, is that two scenarios? What about if an enterprise user can also be a customer? So for an insurance organization, for example, what does that look like? What about if you're doing things working with other partner organizations? What do I require? Can be a really complex question that can't be answered easily, not without help. Medium level topics like, okay, I sort of understand what I require. I've identified some scenarios, but what can the platform do? What can Azure AD do? What does it do? What is it? What can B2C do? What's the difference between B2C and Azure AD? sort of lower level now, what protocols to use. So I've got a rough understanding my identity scenarios. I sort of know for my customer side I need to use B2C, and that's fine. But now what protocol to use? I've heard of this thing called OpenID Connect, and I've heard of this thing called SAML 2 and OAuth 2. What do I have to use? What's the difference between them? Even for OAuth, there's a bunch of flows in OAuth. What does each flow mean? When do I want to use each one? And so on and so forth. And lastly, you've made all these decisions, you understand what you need to do. That's all good. Now I've got these 20 applications I need to migrate onto this platform. How do I do that? What is ADAL? What is MSAL? What's the difference? What is MSAL2? I'm actually using JavaScript and not an MVC app. So how do I securely do this? There's questions upon questions upon questions. It can become a complex topic, or it is. Point 2, a high implementation risk. You need to, I said in the previous slide that the very first 2 questions you ask is how to get people to log into it, etc. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, you have to ask those 2 questions. So that identity decisional architecture underpins everything you do. You need 100% confidence that the right decision has been made the first time and once. And this is where we can help. Because once you've made a particular decision and you go down the path of building your apps, etc., you might get 6 months down the track and you're onboarding users into this production platform. You realize something can't be done. There's been a fundamental design decision, which is incorrect. To retrospectively go back and gut the last 6 months worth of work, re-architect it, redesign it, redeploy it, etc., is really, 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 really expensive. So there's a bit of risk around that. So you need to do it right the first time once. Lastly, Azure AD is lots of things to lots of people. What is AAD versus ADDS, or Active Directory Domain Services? What's the difference between Azure AD and on-prem AD? What about Azure ADDS? Like, what is that? Is AAD, is this where I store users? Is this where I control what users have access to? If I need to generate a token for a user for my application, can I do that? Is that what B2C does? Is that what AAD does? Even as relatively what you would perceive as simple question of what does the word collaboration mean? So let's say that you're working with your customers and you want to collaborate with your customers. That makes sense, right? So you've got a customer, you say, hey, I want to collaborate with you, or I want you to collaborate with me. You can come buy stuff from me, so that's cool. So if you go to Google, or you should use Bing. If you go to Bing and type in Azure AD collaboration, what we mean by collaboration is entirely different to what you mean. There's a high chance of it. And you'll get a lot of results for that. And you'll get a lot of docs about how to implement identity architecture for the collaboration scenario. But it's not what you want to do, it's wrong. Same word though. So yeah, it can be confusing there. So just have an understanding of what that means. That's a big one, collaboration, and I'll talk about that a lot today. So I will cover 3 or 4 core identity scenarios, and this is where the complexity gets into it. For people that I've worked with before around the region, whoever's watching, a lot of this will sound pretty familiar. We've run through this exercise. I run through this exercise daily. So you have your customer identity scenario. You have a platform, say you've got a SaaS app, whatever. You need your customers to log into it. That's pretty straightforward, right? That's a relatively well understood problem or scenario. Have your employee identity scenario. Again, relatively well understood. You have built an internal app, or you'll need your internal employees for your enterprise to log into this thing. They have an employee relationship with the system, not a customer relationship. Pretty well understood. There's the other side, which is now the partner or collaboration scenario. And when I say collaboration, I mean in the Microsoft context, what I spoke about before. I don't mean Jeff down the road you're having a beer with in his garage or whatever. You're collaborating with these people and they want to do work for you or on behalf of you. So you've got, these are generally the 3-ish core scenarios that you sort of want to look at. And it is never the case that these scenarios operate in isolation. Say you've got a SaaS app. That's completely fine. You want your customers to log into the SaaS app to do stuff. But now you need your employees to maintain that SaaS app. So there has to be a way where your employees can log in under the context of an employee to administer and maintain the SaaS app. Likewise, you've probably got a collaboration scenario. You might outsource software development to a place like a Rinco, for example. They're going to come into your house, your enterprise, and do work for you as if they are employees for you, but they're not. They work for a Rinco. So now you've got these 3 scenarios that are never used in isolation. And this is where the complexity comes into it. This is where people say, I've got one app, I've got these 3 scenarios, I've got 4 scenarios. What do I do? How do I do it? And this is where the complexity comes from. Hours and hours and hours I spent talking about this and different scenarios and how to do what now, blah, 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 blah. So the good thing is that we can get really far in solving this, and it's actually quite straightforward. We can ask a few simple questions to have some different meanings, and you can sort of build a list of what this looks like and how to address all of these, all of these scenarios simultaneously for your applications, whatever it is. So, excuse me. So the two core questions, where all this comes from, and if there's one thing you take away today from this session, it's ask these two core questions. For every identity scenario that you identify, so I've got these users, they're going to log in, do this, etc. This is some person from this house, this is a person that we work with, this is a business we're in a relationship with, etc., etc. Ask these core questions. It's the first core question has like a sub question. Who's the audience? Who are they acting on behalf of? What applications and data are they accessing? Excuse me. So are they enterprise employees accessing an enterprise application, accessing enterprise data? So an in-house application, for example, they're enterprise employees more or less. But are they acting on behalf of themselves or as customers accessing an enterprise app, so a SaaS app? That's then different. Or do we have a collaboration or a relationship with them where they're accessing the enterprise application and enterprise data? They don't work for us. Ask these questions for every scenario you can identify. You should have a good idea of what these scenarios are, but frame them in the context of this question. What applications and data are they accessing, and are they acting as their employees or are they customers? Question 2, what and whose Microsoft services do they need access to? Now, when I say Microsoft service, I mean a first-party Microsoft service such as OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint, Power BI, and do they need access to? So are you, for some reason, or is this one of your scenarios, someone you don't have an employee relationship with? Do they need access to your OneDrive or to your Teams or to your Power BI? That's an incorrect pattern, and I'll cover that later on. But this is also an important question to ask because these services only recognize tokens which is issued via AAD. So if you have a customer scenario using B2C all day, that's completely fine. But now if you need to use these first-party Microsoft services, B2C will generate a token which will not be recognized by those services. How do you do that? So again, a very important question to ask. Generally start off with these scenarios, whether you're asking yourself, you're asking teams that you work with internally, you're a partner working with a customer or whatever it is, start off with what's the scenario, what are we trying to do? Put it in plain English. You'll then be able to take that plain English and put it into these questions. So let's dig into these questions, some scenarios, and yeah, we'll sort it out. So question 1. Who are the people accessing the apps and platform acting as? Are they accessing the enterprise app, enterprise data, acting on behalf of the enterprise? They are, in essence, enterprise employees. They work for you. Whether or not there's a collaboration perspective, or they do work for you, they work for you more or less. If they are your enterprise users, you use Azure AD all day, well understood. This is a very common thing you'll see moving forwards. If they work for another organization and they need to collaborate with you, collaborate in the Microsoft term, collaborate. So for example, you've outsourced your help desk or you've got a software partner like Arinco doing work for you or whatever it is. Generally use the external identities collaboration or B2B, whatever. Invite them as guest users. This is the only scenario which would use B2B. You are on the hook for licensing and authorization. The licensing was more important back in the day with P2 because you had to spend a lot of money to gobble up all these P2 licenses. Not so much important anymore. Still something to consider, but you're on the hook for authorization. So what this looks like in a very artistic Visio diagram. So again, this is the scenario where we're working for the enterprise and we're collaborating. We can see on the left-hand side, we have enterprise AD. So this is your AD that you would every day, you go into the office, COVID, all that kind of stuff, whatever. Type in your enterprise username and password, hit go, you log into your enterprise AD. So this is probably you here. I work for the enterprise. I'm logging in with my enterprise AD. I'm accessing enterprise applications and I'm accessing enterprise data. Pretty straightforward. Now we can see on the right-hand side, we have the partner scenario, the collaboration side, and this person is saying, I want to collaborate with enterprise, access the enterprise app and the enterprise data as if I am an enterprise employee. If for that scenario, remember you ask yourself these questions, what's the scenario? If this is how that person responds, you use B2B. Guest invite, bang, done. That's, and I've said this before, this is the only scenario or time you should be using B2B or guest invite into your enterprise tenant. So if they're not saying this, I'm not an enterprise employee, more or less, don't do it. So an example, so for those who don't know, this icon is ServiceNow. So ServiceNow is a large ITSM tool, for creating tickets and change requests and all that kind of stuff. So let's say that, or what is a common pattern or thing to do is for larger enterprises to outsource their help desk to a SI like NTT. So what will happen is when these users, computer's broken, dial 99, get on the help desk, that will actually go to NTT. Because NTT is accessing your instance of ServiceNow and your data, which is your tickets, etc., is internal only. The level 1 help desk staff at NTT, you would B2B them in. That's a good scenario to B2B them in. If it's none of that, don't do that. But so this is a good scenario. Some things to take into consideration when doing this. The partner accounts or the collaboration accounts, those identities are added to your enterprise tenant. So this is why it's important you don't B2B people in that you have a customer relationship with, because they end up in your enterprise tenant. Another one is you're on the hook for authorization. You're on the hook for access policies, that you're on the hook for everything, basically. That's what all those dot points mean. So if we look at authorization and go to the previous slide. So let's say NTT has employed a guy called Joe, again. And Joe needs access to ServiceNow because he's the level 1 help desk dude, whatever. NTT has to call up the enterprise and say, hey, we've employed someone called Joe. He needs access to ServiceNow. Can you give it to him? So if you think about that from a customer scenario, if you have 100,000 customers that you B2B'd in, you have to control what they can access. You have to employ 20 people to answer phones all day to control that authorization. And when phrased that way, you realize that you don't want to be in that business of controlling that authorization. So don't B2B them in. So strong considerations for B2Bing people in, or if you are just going to do that in general. So now we get to the more meaty parts of this proposal, or probably the more common scenarios. So who are the people accessing the apps and platform acting as? So if they're accessing the enterprise app, so say you've built a SaaS app, for example, as a customer in their own data. So let's say the accounting firm Xero, I can log into Xero's SaaS app and I can download a payslip as an example. Again, same thing, enterprise users use Azure AD. The sort of next sub questions from that is, do they already have AD? And do they need access to their own Microsoft services, such as Teams, OneDrive, etc.? And I'll give you an example on the next slide. For both of these questions, use a thing called AD multi-tenancy. And I'll demo that and explain what it means. What if they don't have AD? And what if they don't want access to Microsoft services? They don't care. That's fine. You can use B2C or the external identities CIAM. The customers are on the hook for their own authorization. So this is when those people control who they can and can't have access to, which is what you want to be doing. Excuse me. So who's using the app? More common scenario than not, to everyone, the customer in a non-collaboration perspective or scenario. So again, we've got the enterprise at the top, is you, wherever you work, whatever. You've made a SaaS app. This SaaS app is published in a multi-tenant fashion, and customers need access to their own data. So external data, customer data, ... customer data n, and so on and so forth. So say if this is again Xero, the accounting firm, I want to log in and download my payslip. I don't want other people to be able to look at my payslip. Likewise, I don't care about other people's payslips. So it's a multi-tenant fashion. We have two customer scenarios down here. I'll start on the left-hand side. For external customers, if you will, they're going to say, I want access to the enterprise SaaS app, or log in and do my payslips, whatever. And I want access to my own data. I don't have AD and I don't care about Microsoft services. So this is a perfect use case for B2C. Straight B2C, as we can see. On the right-hand side, you might have a scenario saying, I want to access the enterprise hosted app, Xero, for example. I want to access my own data. I have AD and or I want to access my own Microsoft services. Then you would use AD multi-tenancy. So say, for example, with the example of Xero that I used just before, if you want to log in and save your payslip as a PDF, that's fine. But if they want to provide the functionality to save your payslip to OneDrive, so the button you can click that says save my payslip to OneDrive, you are now interfacing with a first-party Microsoft service. That OneDrive integration, how that works, you need to be issuing a token issued via AD. So you need to be using AD multi-tenancy, and we'll discuss some different things later. But this is two customer scenarios that you sort of need to account for. Depending on what you're doing, obviously, but it's important that you don't necessarily do one or the other. So don't just do the B2C perspective and don't just do the AAD multi-tenancy perspective. If you do the AAD multi-tenancy perspective, you cut out a large portion of the planet. Not everyone has access to an AAD tenant, right? On the other hand, we recommend if customers do have AAD, then use that. Likewise, from an authorization perspective, if you're working with other business, it is a lot easier to figure out if they are a business. Most places have AAD. So you sort of need to do this as well. So the important thing is that you just take both of these use case into consideration, which I had said before. So keep in mind, as Shri said, these slides will be shared after, so you'll have access. We've got flowcharts and stuff, which sort of help you out. So what I will super duper quickly do is, I said before, what is AAD multi-tenancy? What's a common endpoint? And I will quickly show you that.
Tristan, do you mind zooming in a bit?
Yes.
On your portal.
I'll assume you can see this okay. So what I'm in my AAD tenant. This is my enterprise tenant, or for those other examples, this is, you know, the enterprise AAD tenant scenario, if you will. I'm in the AAD blade. I'm going to scroll down to app registrations and I'm going to click new registration. Doesn't matter what I put in there. So what we see here is supported account types. Who can use this application? Accounts in this org only, directory only, etc. Accounts in any org directory, any Azure AD directory, dash multi-tenant or multi-tenant. So this enables anyone with AAD globally to log into your log into your app. So simply creating the app when you tick this box, click register, and then so on and so forth. This is now a multi-tenant AAD application. The second part I said was the common endpoint. So what is the common endpoint? The common endpoint is a really easy way to enable anyone with AAD globally to log in. I'll zoom in here, sorry. Right, so I'll use this later on as well. This is called We'll Grow Groceries. So this is a fictitious e-commerce platform that we have. And this is a demo platform that we use for B2C and B2B, etc. You can't actually buy anything, obviously, but this really demonstrates the capabilities of the products. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click sign in. And you'll see when I scroll down a bit, there's three boxes here: individual customers, business customers, and partners. So you might, for those of you paying attention at home, you might realize this looks like that slide I threw up previously with customer enterprise and collab scenario, whatever, with the SaaS app at the top. Pretty straightforward, or pretty similar, if you will, sorry. So this individual customer perspective, when I click on this, this will flick me off to B2C, put me in B2C land and all those other fun things. The business customer puts the AAD common endpoint, which I'm going to show you in a sec. And the partner side is the collaboration scenario, which B2Bs people into this tenant. So this is how we can demo and explain and show sort of how those different services look and how they fit together. And a common question is, that's cool. We understand that we need to accommodate for all those identity scenarios. How do we do that in our apps? How do we do that in our services? And this is one way you can do that. Keep in mind the code for this, it's all open source, production ready. You can get all these policies, etc., put them in a prod, hit go. And yeah, I'll see if we can, I'll put that in the end of the PowerPoint, the link to this code, and you can go and explore it, see how it all works and pull it apart. So if I click on sign in with your work account. Now, what I might do is, works. So you'll see we've got an AAD login box, that's fine. Now up the top, you can see login.microsoftonline.com/common/auth2, authorize, etc., etc. This is what's called AAD common endpoint. Anyone with AAD globally can go to this URL, put your credentials in, hit go, and you'll sign in or you'll sign up. So instead of having to do these direct federations with all these other businesses that you work with and blah, 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 what you used to have to do with AAD, you can just use the common endpoint and just do it once and it's done. Very easy to do and very cool to do. Now, obviously, you probably don't want anyone with AAD able to log in. So for example, if you've made something and you've got the Ministry of Posts and Telecommunications in Cambodia, probably don't care if they log in, nor you want them to. So you need to be doing your own authorization as well. But this is a very easy and quick way to get started in the AAD ecosystem. So I just said a lot of words, and I just said a lot of text. There's a lot of text, a lot to think about. Thankfully, hopefully you put a bit of a better understanding, and you can apply that understanding to the following flowcharts. These flowcharts, with that context I just explained, basically does this for you. So you can do this really quick, and you can solve a lot of problems very quickly. Again, for whom is the user doing work? Are they working for your organization? Whether it's in a collaborative perspective, they actually do work for your organization. They don't have a customer relationship with you. Either use AAD because they're enterprise employees, or B2B them into your tenant. I'm going to harp on about this. This is the only scenario in which B2B should be used. I'll say this a couple of times. So if you find yourself in the Azure portal inviting guest users, take your hands off the keyboard and ask what you're doing. Please get in touch with Microsoft and ask us. Happy to help you out. If they're doing work for themselves, so either their customers, external, end users like myself, or whatever it is, if they're doing work for their organization, do they have AAD? Then use AAD multi-tenancy. That's what we recommend. It makes it very easy. Again, with the common endpoint, it's like one thing you have to do, and bang, they can log in and start using your stuff. If they don't have AAD, then use B2C. Either local accounts or social accounts, doesn't matter, but that's a good use case for B2C. If you remember, the second question was what Microsoft services does the app or these people need access to? So if they need access to your Microsoft services, so if they need access to your Teams or your OneDrive or your Power BI or something like that, your enterprise, then you have to B2B them in, more or less. But if they need access to their resources, the example I gave before was Xero save payslip to OneDrive button or whatever. If they have AAD, then use AAD multi-tenancy. Pretty straightforward. It's the only thing you can do, more or less. If they don't have AAD, can't be done, more or less. As I said, those first-party services generally won't recognize or adhere to a token issued via B2C. It has to be issued via AAD, so keep that in mind. So again, these flowcharts, that's the quit that's done. That's the summary of this entire preso, right? So the one thing you take away is these two flowcharts. Ask yourself those questions over and over. Make sure you have an explanation for each scenario. So I have some quizzes. We're going to run through this. So I'll just quickly cover what is a token, and then we're going to look at the value for the issuer of the token or who issued the token. So I will just, here's one I prepared earlier. This is a token. This is what's called an ID token. An ID token is an encoded token, which is called a JWT or a JSON web token. It's basically for encoded, as you can see here. And this is what your application will receive, or this is what identity providers will generate, give to you, and you give to, depending on the flows and how it works, more or less, your application will receive something like this. This specific token is called an ID token. And what happens is a token or an ID token basically asserts information about a user, in this case, me. We can see this token has three distinct parts. This top maroon part, the cool blue part, which is what we care about, and this green part down the bottom. The top part basically gives information to different services about the token itself, and the blue part is all the cool stuff we care about. As we can see, some information which has been asserted about me is my name, the identity provider that I came from, Google, my email address, and a few other things as well. Some things that your application will care about is this one, ISS or issuer. This is the AAD tenant or the tenant, the identity provider, which issued the token. As we can see here for B2C is, my tenant, b2clogin.com / and my tenant ID. Then other cool things like subject audience, etc. But what we're focusing on for this quiz is the issuer. So back to our quiz. So we have the enterprise AAD. I'll prove this. The tenant starts in 218, ends in EF3. So if I go back, go properties. Now, if you can see this, tenant ID 218, EF3. So in those two scenarios, the enterprise user and the collaboration user, when this enterprise user logs in, they need to access the app, the data, they work for the enterprise, etc. They'll get a token returned. What's the value of the issuer? Is it going to be 218 EF3? And the second part of the quiz is when the B2B user logs in. So previous example, you've outsourced your help desk, or you've got a software partner like a Rinco doing work. When they log in to access your enterprise application, enterprise data, what's the value of the issuer for their token? I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it, and then we'll run through it. This music is royalty free, by the way, so don't sue me.
And I hear there are some Azure AD B2C swags coming out as well. If you can answer this question.
5 seconds. Okie doke. So, yeah, depending on what you answered. So common answers are, well, we'll run through it first. How's that? Pretty straightforward. When the enterprise user logs into their tenant, the issuer is the value of that tenant. That's, I'm pretty sure everyone would have got that right. That's pretty straightforward. But when the collaboration user logs in, so when they go and log in, I'll do a quick demo of this to prove I'm not lying. They will enter their username and their password for their AD tenant. So what is the issuer? I have here's one I prepared earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into that enterprise tenant, that tenant I showed you before, but I'm going to log in as a collaboration user. And let me just get the details. So as you can see, I've been flicked off to the collaboration tenant, more or less. And I got something, got a token, awesome. Now, if we look at the issuer, it starts in 218 EF3. So the token, even though I logged in with the collaboration username and password, the token was issued by the enterprise. So that catches a lot of people out. They expect the issuer to be the collaboration tenant. So when they're receiving these tokens in their applications and then they're validating the issuer, something you must do, there can be some issues there. And that leads to questions, well, what the hell's going on? Sort of as I said before, when they're logging in, there's some trickery that happens under the hood, but basically these people are logging in as your staff. So there's no difference. No one knows any difference, if you will. So that then leads to the question of how do you know a B2B user? And how you know a B2B user is by looking at the right token. A claim called IDP gets added, which references the collaboration tenant. So when you're doing this collaboration scenario, you need to be checking for these claims and these values, and then making conditional decisions based upon that. But this is a way you can tell when a user has logged in a B2B or guest manner. Next topic. Just looking at time. Yeah, that's fine. So next topic, we're going to look at conditional access now. Same scenario, collaboration user, enterprise app, blah, 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 blah. Enterprise AD has conditional access policy 1, 2, 3. Collaboration tenant or partner tenant has policy 4, 5, 6. So when the enterprise user logs in, what policies get applied? And when the collaboration user logs in a guest B2B manner to the enterprise tenant, what policies get applied? Do the policies stack? And if so, how do they stack? 1, 2, 3 first, then 4, 5, 6, vice versa, or do one of the policies get cut out or no policies get applied at all? I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it and then we'll run through it. It's 15 seconds, bit of a hint, it follows the same logic that we just saw. I'll stop it there. So pretty straightforward for the enterprise user. When the enterprise user logs in, policy 1, 2, 3 gets applied. That's, I'm pretty sure everyone would have got that. But for the collaboration scenario, policy 1, 2, 3 gets applied, 4, 5, 6 gets ignored entirely. So regardless of what conditional access stuff, MDM, all that kind of stuff you've got in your tenant, if you log in a collaborative fashion, you will more or less most of the time get these policies applied. I say more or less because if you look at our docs say this, but then with the TL or the condition that says sometimes the other policy can get applied. So for MFA, for example, our docs state verbatim, in certain scenarios, users can get double MFA'd. So MFA over here, then when they log in to the enterprise, they get MFA again. Depends on the applications, depends on the scenarios, etc., etc. So I can quickly prove that. So what I'm logged into here is, if I zoom in first, I'm logged into, again, that control. So this is my collaboration tenant. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly provision a conditional access policy. I'm going to apply a conditional access policy, which says require MFA. What this is going to do is for all users, all groups, for all conditions, what we're going to do is grant access, but require MFA. Big warning, don't lock me out. So in theory, what happens is anytime I log in with this collaboration user, I should get prompted for MFA. While that does its thing, what I'm going to do is look in this is the enterprise tenant, if you remember. What I'm going to do is go into conditional access over here, super quick, and look at conditional access. I'm not going to apply any policies, so I'll just leave it off. So in theory, when any enterprise users log in, they can just log in, nothing happens. Now what I will do is run through this again. I have too many, like 6 different contexts going. So I'm going to, again, log into the enterprise as a collaboration user. In theory, and what everyone expects is that the conditional access policy should get applied. That makes a lot of sense. No MFA logged in. The MFA policy never gets applied, so keep that in mind. One of the last quizzes I have, device compliance. So again, collaboration user, same stuff. If I have my enterprise AD tenant, I have a conditional access policy that says I require device compliance. I need a compliant device. And in the partner AD, we have the same thing. I also require a compliant device. Collaboration user Joe, he's logging collaboratively to this tenant, and he has a compliant device for his AD tenant. So when he logs in, what happens? How does that work? 30 seconds. And it's the same as everything else. I just told you the answer. So something specifically for device compliance, we've had this question, device compliance does not traverse tenancies. Doesn't matter if you've got a Nokia 3310, the world's most secure device. The compliance perspective from Intune specifically doesn't traverse AD tenancies. You can obviously do things like base conditional access, like check, is it a Windows device? Is it an Android device, whatever, but device compliance doesn't traverse. Again, I had people caught out by this. So fitting it together at 30,000 feet. So again, I said before, sunshine and rainbows, that's great. In reality, what does it mean? This is a really good pattern that I like. It works really well. We use B2C as the entry point to your environment. B2C has the ability to cater for local accounts and social accounts. We know that, that's pretty good. Federating with the multi-tenancy application we discussed before unlocks the common endpoint. This enables you or your customers or whatever access into that entire AD ecosystem super easy. So this is a really good pattern to follow. Your applications are coded as single tenant IDP. There are certain scenarios where you're going to have to instantiate multiple instances to, trust different providers or whatever. But this is a very easy way to get your applications modernized and onboarded. So yeah, again, download the slides, think about this and think about how this works for your environment and your projects. But this is good. This works. So a question on from that. Given we federate down to different providers, can we pass an access token through? This is a super common question that I get all the time, and I am going to quickly show you that in motion. So I said before, there's two tokens, an ID token and an access token. An access token, in essence, grants you access to services, more or less. And so what we can do is, so a common question we get is, because B2C is the entry point, can that take an access token from an identity provider and pass it on to our downstream services? The answer is yes. I'm not so sorry. Actually, I don't know my Facebook details, so it's just better if I am SSO'd already. It should be. I'm going to sign with Facebook. Ta-da, I'm signed into our Woolworth Groceries e-commerce platform. You can go fake buy stuff, etc. So you can see on the top right-hand side, so I don't have Facebook, my dog does, so don't judge me. So we can see in the top right-hand side, my dog's profile picture for Facebook has appeared here. So what has happened is when we signed in, we have a sign-in with Facebook, flicked off to Facebook. As part of that sign-in process, we requested an access token for the Facebook graph to access my profile. That access token was returned to B2C. B2C gave that access token to our backend platform, this e-commerce service, if you will. This e-commerce platform, Woolworth Groceries, has taken that access token, queried Facebook graph with the access token, in my context, for my profile, and retrieved my profile photo. So, to summarize, the common question is, can we take an access token and pass it on to downstream services for them to do stuff? Yes, you can. You've just seen that in action. So we're running out of time, so I'm going to blow through super quick. So looking at identity protection and risk-based conditional access for B2C, you've no doubt seen this slide, blah, blah, blah. So the super cool thing about this is the machine learning perspective, and this is what no other providers can do. And this is the identity protection aspect, where we can dynamically figure out if someone is a dodgy user or a risky user or not. We give it a session score, and then you can apply that to conditional access policies to then require FA or lock out an account, etc. So what I'm going to go through very quickly is this scenario here. I have B2C, obviously, and I have 3 regions, if you will. I have West Europe, which I've got a VM in. I have Sydney, which I have a VM in, and I have Melbourne, which is my computer I'm on. I have a conditional access policy that says allow Australia to log in and disallow everyone else to log in. Pretty straightforward. I also have an identity protection policy that says any risky users, just block them straight away. So it doesn't matter Australia or not, we dynamically do that detection for risky users. I will show you.
Sorry,
yes?
your screen. Yeah, no, all good. It's not visible. Somehow it just went blank, your screen.
Is it good now?
Good. Yep, all good now.
Yeah, cool. So what I will do is very quickly, I will log into B2. Oh God, please no. I will log into B2C and show you what I mean. So this is logging in from Australia East. Not sure if you can see it, but I'm actually running a custom domain in B2C. This is a private preview feature. If you're interested in this, please let us know. We want customers to get feedback. So if you need a custom domain in front of B2C, yeah, get in touch. Woohoo, sign into B2C from Australia, got a token, that's fine. And I'll take that same user and log in via West Europe. So this is a VM sitting in West Europe and blocked. Conditional access, check the region. Now, what about identity protection? So what I will do is I will take that same user I just logged in with, and I will use an anonymous browser, aka Tor browser. So this will come in at medium risk. So if you enable identity protection, people using anonymous browsers will be at minimum a medium risk. Takes a while because it's Tor. Blocked due to identity protection flagging this as a medium risk account, and then putting to conditional access then said, sorry, we're going to block anyone medium risk. So the point being, you can do not just static conditional access decisions, if you will. You can use that machine learning perspective to really protect your brand or secure your services. So wrapping this up, how can we help? Get in touch with your Microsoft team. We are more than happy to come and ask these questions, answer these questions, walk through it with you. As I said at the start, can be complex, can be scary, but it's not really. If you just talk through it in a calm manner, as we've done today, more than happy to help. Please get in touch. To summarize, identity can be complex. Sounds easy, very quickly becomes complex, but don't be scared, because if you ask yourself 2 core questions, it actually makes your job so much easier. It's not even funny. If there's anything you take away from this, it's just please these 2 questions. Ask people who you're acting on behalf of and what Microsoft services do you need access to. B2B isn't the answer. If you find yourself in the portal inviting guest users, take your hands off the keyboard and mouse, please get in touch with Microsoft and just ask yourself what you're doing. We looked at token, issuer and CA nuances and how it applies across tenants and in collaboration scenarios. And we had a lightning fast look at conditional access and identity protection in action. And lastly, we looked at how we can help. Please get in touch. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm not sure.
Have one question actually. We have one question. So I'll read it out for you if you can answer that. So first of all, they have said, like, obviously it's a great presentation and thank you, Tristan, you did an amazing job. So the question is like, question 1, only member accounts within AD seem to be able to log into MSFT service, like Microsoft services, such as Dynamics 365. Any way around this use case, or perhaps an outlier?
Sorry, I was reading the question. So with AD, so I'm going to join MSFT services. Anyway, around this, so I haven't tested this. We need to fully test it. But again, if you could pass an access token through to your service, you can pass an access token from AD through to your service by B2C. So that could be a way around it. As long as those services get an access token that they expect, then you can use it. So you would have to sort of build those building blocks to achieve that, if you will. But that's sort of why I showed passing access token through.
And then there's another question as well, which is about sharing documents and files with the customer. Is the best approach to whitelist their domain in the SharePoint, enable sharing with them directly? Doesn't this add them as a guest into our tenant?
Yeah, it does. So I don't know anything about SharePoint. I'm a bit allergic to it, if you will. Is using SharePoint to share documents, is that the best way to do it? I guess I'm a software developer at heart, so I would probably rather build something to do that. If SharePoint is the way, then that's fine. That's up to you. Yeah, I can't answer the best way to do with SharePoint, I guess. So I don't know anything about SharePoint. So.
Depends on your organization as well, if you want to give external people access to the SharePoint as well, because you've got internal docs too in there.
Yep, and doesn't this add them as guest users into our tenant? I believe that will. So I don't know if in SharePoint you can do like a share like you do in OneDrive. Does that add to them tenant? Probably not. But if you need to give them full access to your SharePoint, then you're probably going to have to do that.
Yeah. That's all. We don't have any more questions coming through.
Perfect. Just on time.
Yep. We have got like 15 minutes left, but we don't have any questions. So thank you guys again for joining, and thanks Tristan for the amazing session. So please actually go through this Microsoft forms we have created. We want to hear from you. What exactly would you like to hear from us in season 3? And happy B2C. Thanks.